Hello and welcome to this, the first interview for Whippersnapper. My name's Adrian Burbie and today I am joined by Nick de Bois, Conservative MP for Enfield North. Mr de Bois, good morning.
Good morning to you.
So, since you became Enfield's MP in 2010, what have you done to improve the lives of young people in Enfield?
Well, I think, first of all, it's always worth remembering that your responsibility is to all your constituents, and obviously I have a very large population of young people. I think the first thing that I had to do was improve the life chances. We came into power when unemployment was an extraordinary high rate, and in Enfield it was particularly bad. And we were somewhere around 7.5% of the population was unemployed. Youth unemployment particularly was very high. So in that sense, the focus on reducing unemployment was critical. And I'm pleased to say where we are now, it's halved. Youth unemployment particularly has halved. Overall unemployment is down 40%. So in the big picture, that was really important. But that wasn't enough for me. So I set about also engaging in a series of activities that would do a little bit more on the ground. So within my first year, I set the first of my jobs fairs. Now these jobs fairs were where I brought local employers, local colleges and local companies looking at apprenticeships as well as other jobs together under one roof, and drew in people who were either at school, had left school or were considering university, and some from university, to meet every year and come to this annual jobs fair. So they had direct contact, not just where they could look for jobs or apprenticeships, but we also offered seminars that gave them the sort of training you don't always get at school, the soft skills, the CVs, the advice on how to present yourself. Some of the things that perhaps we focus sometimes too much on the academic and not necessarily on how to get through some of those hurdles and barriers to getting your first job.
And how much would you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, that you care about youth issues in Enfield?
Well, it would be impossible for me not to care about youth issues, because I have 4 children who are now all grown up, and the oldest is 28. But of course, you know, any father will tell you that the minute you, perhaps before you have children, you're a little more about yourself. The minute you have children, you're entirely focused on the future. I take a great level of care and interest because I know that the decisions we are making in this Parliament, the decisions we make locally, are going to have a far greater effect on younger people than they are on people of my age, because you've got your whole lives ahead of you. Which was why one year it became obvious to me as I was doing these jobs fairs that actually many employers were saying, look, people are coming to interview, they've got A-levels, they've got O-levels, GCSEs, that shows my age, but actually they're just not ready for the work environment. They're not used to what's required when you come for interview, or the regularity and reliability needed for a job. So I actually took a group of employers and recruitment specialists into any of the schools that were happy to invite us in, to meet with age groups from 14 right through to 17 and 18, to have open sessions and workshops on preparing them for some of the life skills that perhaps they hadn't been focused on. So I think it's easy for me to say I care, but I think there's a number of things we can look at.
Why did you vote in 2010 to raise student fees up to £9,000?
Well, I think it's quite topical you're asking me this now, because the premise of your question would be, you've raised fees by £9,000, therefore you don't care about young people. Actually, far from it. I think when you go back to my age, when in 1979 I went to a college, I didn't go to a university, I went to what's called a technical college. Actually, pretty much anyone could get their fees paid for by the state, but less than 5% of those eligible to go to university or college were actually going. So the state could afford to pay for it. The last government came along and said, oh, at least 50% of those eligible to go must go, but gave no thought how to pay for it. So it became untenable, the situation, as more and more people wanted to go. So we had to revise the system for those that go, who benefit from that education. If they can afford it, they are then able to pay it back. And I think this is the key, and this is why student numbers applications to universities have not gone down, but this year have gone up, because the repayment scheme is much more generous than it ever was, even under the loan scheme brought in by the last government, the last Labour government. And the point here is that, for example, if you are earning, go into a vocational job and earn less than, I think it's about 22,000 now, you won't pay it back. And it graduates up so that the more you earn, the more you pay back. But actually, even on salaries around £30,000–35,000, the repayments are very small. And I think it's not unreasonable to ask those who've got a stake in their future, a stake in their education, and who will want to go on and earn the middle to higher end salaries, to ask them to...
Do you think the Conservative Party has a young person problem?
I think politics has a young person problem.
But do you think the Conservative Party...
Well, I think the evidence is on the ground. It did have. You know, there was that classic tradition of twin set and pearls, of the elderly generation being the membership of the Conservative Party. I invite you to come out with me this Saturday when we bring together people across North London from my constituency who go campaigning in the run-up to this general election. You actually have to start playing spot the older person, because young people are engaged. They are now very concerned because they recognise that politics is going to affect their lives. We are taking decisions today that's going to affect them, so they're out campaigning.
But why does Labour have a 15% lead when it comes to 17 to 22 years old?
Well, in that sense, we're talking about politics and a perception of the policies that might appeal to them. I think what we have to do is understand that we had a brand, and this was my background in communications, we had a brand that actually, although the party had changed, we hadn't been able to bridge that change with the idea of people being able to support the Conservative brand. Now that we've been in power for 4 years, admittedly in a coalition, I think we have had the chance to demonstrate what we stand for, what we believe in and what our values are. But until we can communicate those, I think that is the challenge. That is how we have to win younger people over. And we will see at this general election how successful we've been.
What do you think the cause of this current disaffection with the Conservative Party among young people is?
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question. I think what you are saying is, do Labour enjoy a greater shift, a greater support amongst younger people? The premise of the question is almost that we don't have any support. We do. And I think we're going to continue to see that grow. Because we are here making the long-term decisions that will go on to affect younger people over the next 10, 15, even 20 years. And that's the challenge for us, is to realise that we're not going for short-term fixes and hits that may appeal. We have to convince people that actually the longer-term solutions that are tougher sometimes in decisions to make are actually in the long-term best interest of younger people.
Edmund has recently announced that a future Labour government would lower tuition fees to £6,000.
Yeah.
How will the Tory party...
Well, he can't pay, can he? And I don't think we're in that business. Well, look, we can't have universities, we can't have hospitals, we can't have our roads and transport system unless we have a good economy. And to have a good economy, you have to ensure that we continue to reduce the amount of money that we are borrowing every year to meet the budget. That's the budget deficit. We brought it down by half, having inherited something like 150 billion a year annual deficit. In other words, spending more every year by £150 billion than we take in taxes. Now, because we're bringing that down, we've kept interest rates down, so we're paying less on the debt, which means we can spend money as the economy grows on universities, colleges, hospitals and transport. Labour can make short-term promises, but they can't fund them, and that ultimately takes us back to the car crash of the economy we had before 2010.
In 2010, only 51.8% of 18 to 24-year-olds turned out to vote. How do we get more young people engaged with politics?
Well, ironically, I think things like the student fees did engage more people. Indeed, much at the expense of the Liberal Democrats, but they did engage. I think what I'm looking for, and I hope we will see, is that a result as the expansion, particularly of the social media age, the YouTube age, that we will see greater participation this time round. We can't be sure until the evidence is presented. But I know that on the ground in my constituency in Enfield North, we've actually been very active in engaging in democracy at schools. I've lost count of the number of times I've been to schools and colleges, been to youth centres, been to activities, be they sports and leisure or more socially orientated. And I think we'll hopefully see the benefit of that in an increased turnout. In other words, we're not going to be able to do very much in the next 3 months. It's the work that's gone on beforehand. And I would say across the House, across the parties, there are some MPs who've been very well engaged in the media and reaching out to younger people, more so than others. And the proof will be in the pudding in 3 months' time.
Would you be in favour of votes at 16?
I'm not yet convinced of the argument for votes at 16. Just by lowering the voting age doesn't mean that you're necessarily automatically increasing engagement. You know, and so I think we've got to be, much as I would say, do I believe there should be more younger members of Parliament? Yes, I do. Do I think all members of Parliament should be young? No, I don't. I think we should have a broad range and a broad mix. But I think actually the key thing for us to do is not to think we can improve voter engagement just by reducing the age, but actually prove that we can reach out and engage with younger people so that they become more active in politics, and then decisions like that can be left to that generation.
What about mandatory voter registration at secondary schools, or mandatory first-time voting? Would you be in favour of proposals like that?
Look, I've always prided myself as being a politician who doesn't sit on the fence and will give you a straight answer. Whether you like the answer or not is free for others to judge. I am essentially a libertarian, so the idea of forcing people to register to vote is inherently unattractive to me. But I also know the price that has been paid through history to have that vote. I also look across at other countries when they get the vote for the first time, and I see them queue for hours to exercise their vote and their franchise. I am warming to the idea that much like in Australia, where you are compelled to register and turn up to vote, but have the right to vote for none of the above. But my libertarian instincts are stopping me saying to you, I would go and argue for that in the House of Commons. I believe that politics, to be successful, should mean that the voluntary engagement of people is higher.
What's your opinion on unpaid internships? Many young people are currently in those kinds of things.
Yes, I'm very old-fashioned about this. I actually believe that a genuine internship can provide tremendous value to give people opportunities to, if you like, get on a level playing field. And I've taken interns through here where we have only met the expenses of the intern. But I only have them for very short periods of time, because I think it is the value of an intern is actually to give them a taste and an experience of what it would be like here. It helps their CV. I think if you take an intern on for a long period of time, then they are doing a job and they should be paid for that job. So I've had work experience from school, I've had work experience from college graduates, and they tend to be for very short periods, a couple of weeks. So I think if you drill down, I think when someone is taken on a long-term basis to do a job, then you know, they should be paid for that job.
And are you in favour of the living wage?
Yes, very much so. I know people think Conservatives are inherently against that, but look, what's my background? I only came into politics 4 years ago. I'm 55, nearly 56. I spent my whole life starting and running my own business, employing people. I've employed a lot of people over my time. And I had great fun, and always realised it was a privilege to give people a job. And I always felt that actually when you get a job, it can be a life-changing experience, particularly your first job. And we should pay fair wages for that job. It makes good business sense. What is the point of having someone on such a low salary that actually they're going to be looking for another job almost from the day they start with you? I think London particularly has a particular problem, so London living wage I think is absolutely the right way to go. And I'm also uncomfortable with the idea that some companies and some corporations are actually employing people in the knowledge that if they pay them a low wage, the state, you, the taxpayer, end up subsidising that corporation by subsidising the wages.
But what are you doing to make the living wage
Well,
reality?
I'm advocating it and promoting it in my own constituency because it is nothing more than a voluntary system. I'm very pleased this government, far more than the last government, has raised the living wage in the last, the minimum wage, and I would love to see us bring in a living wage. I think the problem is at the moment making that statutory is kind of pointless because what we'd really want to see is a planned increase of the minimum wage so that it gets up to the living wage. It would be difficult for a number of reasons just to go like that, but employers are in London moving towards this, and every time I find an employer I always urge them to pay that minimum. I would never have not paid it in my business life.
What do you make of John Berco's Digital Democracy report last week?
Well, look, rather than discuss the detail of his report, let me kind of not come from this idea that we must digitise. I think that's wrong. We should be looking at the other end of the telescope. What is the outcome we want? So, in other words, we want more voter engagement. We want to take advantage of modern technology where it is effective and makes, look in Parliament, it's a Victorian building trying to compete in the 21st age, and where we can bring ourselves up to the most efficient that we can be. But if you ask me, should we be, for example, voting digitally, I will tell you that's exactly what I thought when I came into Parliament. Within a month I had changed my mind, because we have an old-fashioned system where MPs have to physically walk through a lobby, and we get locked in that lobby for up to 8 minutes whilst we are going through on the voting process. Now what's great about that is that I could be squashed next to the Prime Minister, the Minister of State for Industry, and they can't go anywhere, and I can lobby them. I suspect that's where the term came from. So I can say, "Oi, Prime Minister, my knife crime bill, I need that to pass into law. Do you know how this has affected the lives of young people? We can make a difference here." That's exactly what happened. So digital voting may sound great, but it means we, a backbencher, will lose yet another opportunity to corner a minister.
John Bercow said that by 2020, secure online voting for general elections should be a reality for all voters.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a good idea?
I certainly, as long as we can have the right security guards, for people to be able to vote digitally, I do see massive advantages. But we have to be sure, safe, about the integrity of the electoral roll. Now, the integrity of the electoral roll is crucial, and I don't believe it is the integrity of it is as high as it should be now. So there is no point just going to a digital model unless we can deal with the integrity of the electoral roll as it is.
So what are you doing to make sure that these proposals aren't ignored and just placed in a Whitehall 5 cabinet? Will you raise these proposals in the Commons?
Well, I have. I have been discussing this issue. It is simply, at the moment, his report, I hope before this Parliament, will be debated by this Parliament, but it is possible it will not be. Do we raise issues of the electoral roll? I've regularly raised issues about the integrity of the electoral roll. Do we argue our corner about introducing voting and, online? Yes, of course we do. We now have a new online registration system for people to register to vote. You've literally just got to go to your computer now and vote. But actually there's still some integrity flaws in there, so I think we can learn from our experience and move it forward. The only time I sound cautious on digital democracy, though, is if I feel it could be to our disadvantage. as I've described in the voting lobbies here. But in voting terms, it is inevitable, but we've got to get it absolutely right.
Do you think the people of Enfield value you as their MP and the work you've been doing for the last 5 years?
Well, we'll find out in 3 months' time.
You failed in your primary campaign to prevent the downgrading of A&E and maternity wards at Chase Park Hospital. So, if the people of Enfield value your work so much, why are you one of the most at-risk MPs in London? Well,
look, I would say that we have a 3.8% majority, I think it is that we have. That is the nature of our political system. You get some safe seats, and you get seats that are forever changing hands. Enfield North has forever changed hands. There are numerous reasons why votes will change as regularly as they do. They're policy linked. They're also linked to the way suburbs change. Enfield 20 years ago was probably would have been seen as a leafy suburb. It's not now. It's got an extraordinary diversity in it. You can go to the northwest of Enfield and you still have almost a hint of a leafy Hertfordshire village up at Cruise Hill. You come down to the southeast into Enfield Highway, you know, we're talking about something that would perhaps be regarded as more inner city in its urban nature. So you're bound to have and that's changed over 20 years, so inevitably it changes. Look, also I think voting habits have changed. Really interesting statistic for you here, which is why anyone who can call the next election is, in my opinion, completely wrong. In the last general election, the Labour Party, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats secured something like 83% of the share of the votes cast. On present day opinion polls, those same three parties are barely scraping 65–66%. So a large chunk of vote has gone out, up for grabs, for a number of reasons, to a number of other parties. And that's what's wonderfully unpredictable about this general election.
Be the most likely outcome on May the 7th?
Well, I've just told you, anyone who thinks they can predict this election is wrong, and I'm not going to now try and convince you that I'm the only one that's right. What I think people should think, hopefully will think about, is we have gone through the first peacetime coalition ever. I believe it was the right thing to do when we were facing the awful Labour legacy of a financial crisis. We were bankrupt, we were in trouble, and it was not looking good, and a lot of people have suffered and been through a lot of pain to put that right. The coalition, as everyone can see, in this last year of life, is frankly a marriage that's been held together by a fixed-term parliamentary act that says we can't divorce and separate until May the 7th of this year. Now, at the moment, all the polls point to a coalition again. I don't like coalition for the following reason. I'm going to stand on a manifesto, and if I stand on that manifesto and we win, I am obliged to deliver that, and if I don't, I should be, in trouble with the voters, quite rightly. But if we have a coalition, then behind closed doors, party chiefs are just going to tear up those promises to people and say, we couldn't deliver all of those, so we're going to lose this, this, this and this. Within 24 hours, the manifesto we sought your vote on could go out the window, simply because we end up with a coalition. There will be no choice about that, and that's why I think casting a vote is crucial this time.
I want you to imagine this scenario, if you may. The Conservatives lose on May the 7th. David Cameron is no longer the leader. Who do you support, Theresa May or Boris Johnson?
No, I won't go down that road. And look, why should I? Because then the story is ex-MPs back next leader. We're going into what is a really crucial election. There is a choice of Prime Minister. It is David Cameron or it is Ed Miliband. So no one should be jumping the fence and thinking beyond that, because whoever is in opposition, it will be of no relevance or interest to anyone who the next leader is. It will be who is Prime Minister. A man, we believe, who does not have the plan, the economic plan or the policies to actually keep this country on the right track, because Ed Miliband and his party are frankly in chaos over their policies. Or is it that we stick to the long-term economic plan of David Cameron and George Osborne?
I'd like to round off this interview, if I may, by asking you some quick fire
Sure.
questions. Some of these have been sent in from our readers and our viewers. So, number one, Churchill or Thatcher?
Oh gosh, Thatcher.
Thatcher or Cameron?
I am a child of Thatcher, okay? And what I mean by that is I grew up with her policies. It gave an ordinary bloke like me from an ordinary background a chance to go on and run his business. So I would say Thatcher was for her time, David Cameron is for this time.
Who would you rather face, Ed Miliband or Ed Balls?
What, in the chamber?
Yes.
Ed Miliband.
Any reason?
Well, I think actually it's because he's the leader of the party. If you can challenge the leader of the party, which is the wonderful thing about our democracy, that's where you go for.
Do you think he's a soft touch? Is that why you're saying you'd rather face him?
Look, I don't think anyone who has done a few years in Parliament should be seen as a soft touch. But because his responsibility is to be the next Prime Minister, I'd like to demonstrate to him why he's not fit to be the next Prime Minister.
Where do you stand on the EU?
I want a referendum. I've argued for a referendum. I rebelled against my own government when they didn't want a referendum, and I voted for it. That was important, and only the Conservatives will deliver it. How would I vote in that referendum? Well, all my instincts are to vote to come out. If there was an election today, I would vote to come out. I've lived in Europe, I've worked in Europe, so I think I understand the issues around that. I'd have to see what's on the table if there is a renegotiation, but I suspect it's going to be difficult to get a good deal out of Europe, so I'm leaning towards coming out.
With regards to education policy, who do you think is more successful, Michael Gove or Nicky Morgan?
I think Michael Gove made the major changes that will drive up the standards, and I think it's incumbent on Nicky to develop those and take them forward. What Nicky has brought to it is that, having gone through a period of disruption and change for people, is that I think she's bringing a listening ear to it, which I think is absolutely the right time to do that.
Are you in favour of grammar schools?
Yes.
Have you pushed for these in the Chamber?
Well, not only have I pushed for them in the Chamber whenever they are there, but I also belong to the group of MPs who believe in the right to have a grammar school back. At the moment, the law is simple. You can only extend an existing grammar school. Not many of the grammar schools actually want to do that. We have one in Enfield, for example, which is a grammar school, and I don't think we should be frightened of this. I think we should give people the choice and let them vote with their feet.
Are you in favour of fracking?
Yes, I am, and I think fracking's had one interesting, just the threat of fracking has helped bring down the oil prices, which I think is something that people will be quite comfortable about. But it needs its safeguards. We've introduced those safeguards. We listened to the people's concerns about it a week ago or so, whenever the vote was, and I think that's the reality now, that it has to be on the table.
Do you reckon fracking will become a reality, because so many contracts have been put off?
Well, it is a reality, particularly in the south coast of America, around Texas way, where it's changed and transformed the economy out there. Do I see it happening quickly here? No, I don't see it happening.
Do you support HS2?
I have supported it to date. What concerns me, and I think needs to be challenged robustly, is that if private money isn't prepared to back it, why should the public money, the taxpayers' money? But at the moment, I believe we need our infrastructure. We need to widen this economy. Too much of it is in the southeast. And if it helps drive it up north, which is what it's meant to do, along with Crossrail 3, then I still think on balance it's worth backing.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We could spend the whole day chatting about such issues. Mr. de Bois, it's been a pleasure to interview, and thank you for finding the time to speak to a bunch of 16-year-olds. So, my name's Adrian Burbie. Thank you for tuning in for Whippersnapper UK. Do join us next time when we'll be interviewing another policy maker, mover or shaker, or promise breaker. But for now, from me, goodbye.